Hello, you're listening to I Know That Voice with Mark Pougatch.
Hello and welcome back to episode 2 of I Know That Voice, the podcast with voices you know, telling stories you don't. For the first episode, we met the legendary Eleanor Aldroyd, whose stories took us from Sochi to Sydney and from Wimbledon to Westminster Abbey. And we're following up strongly with another household voice, if that's a phrase, from the sports broadcasting world. Joining us today is a man who's in front of the camera every time an important ball is kicked. He's also covered pretty much every sport as both the youngest and longest serving presenter of one of the nation's most famous sports radio shows. He's been generous enough to give us his time on a working day where he's covering the Premier League for television, so we're very blessed and privileged to be welcoming the very generous and one and only Mark Pougatch. Mark, how are you doing? Thanks for joining us on I Know That Voice.
Well, thank you very much. I'm absolutely fine. Thank you, Will.
The question we start with all our guests on every episode, how would you describe what you do in a sentence and why do you love it?
How would I describe what I do? I would say transmitting the excitement that I would feel if I was at home on my sofa watching or listening to sport, transmitting that from the studio, from the ground, from wherever I am, to make it accessible to people, to make it enjoyable for people, and to be the conduit for everybody that's at home who is the same as me, which is, in other words, they're not good enough to be out there on the field.
Nice one. So let's take it back to where it all began. Talk to me, when you were at school, you must have been sports mad. You've covered, as we've said in the intro, all kinds of different sports. As a youngster, were you into lots of different sports yourself?
Yes, no. I've always been absolutely sports mad. I would say the only things I'm not into is anything to do with an engine. It doesn't really get me that. I'm not into cars, much to my wife's disappointment. Probably my children's are really not interested in cars. But I've always been sports mad. I grew up with a cricket nuts father. I mean, he's absolutely obsessed, in a really good way, obsessed by cricket. And he started a cricket club that I'm now chairman of. So we play cricket in the garden all the time. Fun enough, not a particularly football mad household, actually. Anything but, really. My dad didn't mind football. That'd be the best way to say it. He sort of, because he knew I loved it, he was fine with it. But he wasn't football mad. He was cricket mad, racing mad, rugby mad, that sort of thing. But yeah, I just love playing it from the word go. I love playing it at home, playing it at school. And I just thought quite early on, actually, we were listening to Test Match Special in the garden. I was playing cricket with my dad one Saturday in the summer, and I said to him, and we were listening to the Test Match from Lords, I said, and they were all men at the time, are these men being paid to go to the cricket and watch Test Match? He went, yes. I said, they mean paid to go to Lords on a Saturday and eat cake and watch cricket? He went, yes. I said, well, that's not a job, is it? That's not a job. I'm going to do that. And that's what I did. And we all need supportive parents. Sadly, my father didn't live to see me or hear me do any of this, but he knew I wanted to do it, and so he was very supportive in the sense of just said, if you want to, whatever it is you want to do, you have to commit to it fully. You've got to absolutely do it. And I always say that to people your age who I speak to, want to do the business. I say, you have to be fully committed because it's a difficult business to get into. It's a difficult business to stay relevant. It's an unbelievably it's a very sociable business in that the people you work with are great. Yep. But you can't say, I can't do that match because I want to go to a party on a Saturday night or whatever. That doesn't work. You're going to have to work Saturdays, Sundays, weekends, evenings. So you've got to be, if you want to do it, you've got to be fully into it.
And as a parent now, working those weekends, is that difficult?
They're in their 20s now, but it wasn't easy in the sense that there were times I wanted to go and watch them, play something, and I couldn't because I was going to a game. But it's all part of the deal, to be honest, Will. And it sounds like, and you are having to have very understanding people around you. An incredibly understanding wife, this is what I do, and she knows that. So no, there have been times. I wouldn't deny it. There have been times I'm a bit like, I really want to go watch them play something rather than me go to work. But it's what you do. That's what you've chosen to do, and it's what you want to get on with. So it's part of the deal. And let's be honest, it's a great job. So it's something that you can come to terms with pretty quickly.
Yeah, the term sacrifice
doesn't exactly
fully apply. So you talk about committing. How old were you first when you turned to your dad and said, is this a real job? Do you remember?
I think I was probably about 13, I think.
Okay.
But you say that age 13, don't you? And
yeah.
but I think it was really my last year at university which is, your last year at university when everyone's going, what are we going to do when we leave? And people, there's a thing called the milk round, which everyone knows. You're probably all in it now. And you go, am I going to go and work this, that, and the other? And then I thought, if I'm going to be serious about this, what do I do? And I thought, well, give it a go, because there's nothing worse than being 31, 32, married with 2 young kids and a mortgage, where you really can't suddenly decide you want to change career. So give it a go and see what happens. So I think it was my last year at university. I thought, right, seriously, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to commit to this and see where we get to.
And what were the first steps then?
I went to do, which I would still say to everybody today, and there are a lot more of them I noticed. I went and did a postgraduate in diploma in radio. I think it was just mainly radio journalism. I think it was a tiny bit of TV in London. So I went and did that, and that was great because it gives you the official training. It gives you the sort of official stamp that says, you're a trained radio broadcaster. You can now go out into the world. But my generation will tell you, which is the truth. We went out into the world. There was no Sky. No, there was just Sky TV. Sorry, there was just Sky TV, but there was no 5 Live. I don't think there was any Talk Sport. There was a lot less than there is now. There was obviously no internet. So there was no blogs. There was no no university radio really. Very few, but there was no club radio, there was no club TV, so there was a lot fewer jobs. But it was good, that official stamp which said you effectively said you've been trained, you can go and apply for a job and people will accept your training as kosher.
And so after that training, after that course, you then went to BBC Local Radio, is that right, BBC Essex?
Yeah, freelance, so I worked in London, what was then called GLR, now Radio London. I worked at LBC. LBC is very strong again. It was very strong then. It's had a big dip in between. But I started at the bottom. I started local radio. Absolutely, started local radio, which is brilliant. Because local radio, I think, and it is still the same now, actually. I mean, local radio, BBC Local Radio has had an absolute pummeling. It's had a pummeling from the BBC, frankly, everybody else. Things they're doing to local radio, frankly, in my view, are disgraceful, what the BBC is doing to local radio. Because it's where, there's so much that's good about local radio. And it's umbilical cord with the local community. And COVID showed all this particularly. People want to know what's going on. At local radio, I learned to commentate, present, report, edit, everything. It was brilliant fun. Absolutely brilliant fun. It was just a fantastic couple of years. You learn to do everything.
And what was the biggest? Can you remember a specific kind of nugget of advice that you got in those early days at local radio that just spurred you on to
Make your
go
mistakes
and go
when
and
there
go?
aren't as many people listening.
Yeah, which is the
There's
key.
one county listening. This is not as bad as the whole country.
But eventually, the whole country did listen, because I think were you 26 when you made the jump to Sports Report on BBC 5?
No, I was a bit older when I made the jump to Sports Report. I was 26. I was 26 when I made the jump to London.
Okay.
I was 26 when I went to London. Because basically, working for BBC Local Radio, I think it's still if you want to. Some people don't want to. Some people want to be the king or queen of their patch, and that's brilliant because we need people like that. But for me, it was you go to local radio, which I love, but that's like playing for Macclesfield, and then you hope that Manchester United come and sign you, and you obviously go back into the Manchester United reserves. Of course you do. So I was 26 when I went to London, and then how old was I when I got? No, I was 32 when I got Sports Report. It was 2000. I was 32. But so I went to London, and you go back to the beginning, as it were. But you're back at the beginning in the big. If you want to do radio, which is I did then, you're back in the big pond. You're the smallest fish in the big pond. But you're surrounded by all the sharks and the piranhas. It's brilliant because these are people you've been listening to 5 years earlier when you were a student, most of them, and now you're working with them. It's great. It's quite intimidating, but it's in a good way.
Yeah.
You know what? The world's a different place today, and probably. I think you walk into a place, it'd be very different today than it was in the mid-90s. And that's not to say it was the one's better or worse than the other. It's just, it was intimidating in the mid-90s. You have to be good at your job. Otherwise, you'd be out, otherwise someone would tell you you are shit at your job. I personally don't have a problem with that. I remember very, very clearly, in the middle of, and I told this story to the person who told me this. I told this to him 6 months ago. I can't remember where we were. He was called Graham Reed Davis. He was a producer of Sport on 5. He was a great man, GRD. I said, GRD, do you remember what you said to me in the middle of the Wimbledon, which overlapped with the World Cup, obviously, in America in 1994? He said, no. He said, I was reading the bulletins. I kept getting Goran Ivanišević's name wrong. I kept mispronouncing his surname. You came up to me after about the third time I got it wrong, and he went, if you can't get his name right, you will have no future in the sports broadcasting business. And I was like, Christ alive, Mark, you better get this right. This is serious, this is serious stuff here. This isn't patting you on the back and saying, get better next time. Listen, it'd be like missing 3 open goals in a row and then getting dropped by, Eric Ten Hag. It's fair enough. If you're not good enough to do it, you're out the team. I don't care. I'm not here to make your life easier or pat you on the back and say, better luck next time. Get it right.
And who are some of the biggest piranhas that you looked at when you went to London and just went, oh my word, it's him?
Well, the word piranha slightly implies that we're going to eat me, weren't they? I was just really, I'd grown up, John Inverdale is a good friend of mine now, did Sport on 2, and I listened to him a lot. Gary Richardson, who I have an enormous amount of respect and admiration for. All these people I'd been listening to 5 years earlier, now I was working with them. And it was like, right. And my mum used to say to me, bless her, she'd say, when you started a new place, just, try and just be quiet for a few. She obviously knew I was quite noisy. Just be quiet for a bit. Didn't work that well, but just bed yourself in before you start making too much noise. It was great.
And then, age 32, you got the call for Sports Report. Who gave you that call, and what was that time like for you?
Well, I funny because I always thought when I was about 26, 27, I'd probably be a commentator. That's what I thought. But life's about opportunities, and life's about what people offer you. Simple as that. You never quite know which to, and I was doing both. When you're that age, someone says, go and commentate on that. I did a football match, I did some cricket, or go and present that program. That's whatever. And then one day, Bob Shannon was the controller then, and he said, right, Ian Payne's moving on. We'd like you to present this. And I was like, yeah, of course. This is a program I've grown up listening to. It's a program I'd grown up listening to when my dad would be that generation, that wartime generation, especially a single child, where radio was everything. Because, they were growing up before television, so radio was a great accompaniment. So my dad loved radio. He'd often clean his shoes for the week, listening to Sports Report. 5 pairs of shoes. I can picture him now, downstairs by the downstairs loo, polishing 5 pairs of shoes, getting ready, obviously Monday to Friday, getting ready for the next week, listening to Sports Report. So for someone to say that, I was like, yeah, absolutely. And also because, although I do a lot of football, football is football. There's a lot of football, full stop. I certainly at that age, didn't want to do just football. And that's why Sports Report really appealed to me, because I knew there would be the Olympics. I knew there'd be some golf, and there'd be some cricket, and there'd be some rugby, and it really appealed to me. So to do that I did that for 16 years. That's the longest. I'm reasonably confident saying no one will ever do it for longer. I may be wrong, but I doubt it. Mark Chapman can ring me in 10 years' time if he wants, but,
we will see.
It's a long time.
Fantastic. Now, I grew up listening to Sports Report like millions of other people. My dad shined his shoes to Sports Report as well, in fact. But obviously, as a kid, you're listening and you're like, oh, look, there's Mark Pougatch again, and he's at Crawley Town just spewing away at all the different sport that's going on that weekend. But when you get older, you realise the operation behind it. And just take us behind the scenes. Like, what goes on to make Sports Report happen? Who are the key players on a Saturday at 5 p.m?
Well, it's not a very big team, funnily enough. That's a huge. There are lots of differences in radio and TV, but that's one of them. So you've got obviously you've got everybody who's out on the road. So let's say you've got 20 venues you're at that day. Various sports, plus producers. Probably. They'll probably ring me up if they hear this and go, you've got that wrong. You never knew how that many people. Probably only about 40, 50 people, because there's probably about 5 or 6 people in the studio. There are about 30 or 40 out on the road, something like that as well. It's not a very big team that pulls it together. It's incredibly intricate. They had, it was the 75th anniversary the other day. It's worth people having a look on Twitter to find it, because they did a little couple of minutes of the people in the studios, the editor and the producers. An editor and a producer, studio manager pushes all the buttons, and about 3 or 4 producers at the back. You'd be surprised how few people make an extremely complex operation. Because it is a very complex operation.
And one of the producers you compared to Claude Makelele once. I think it was Claire.
Oh, that was Claire, my first producer. Brilliant. Because just doesn't get any of the limelight or any of the praise, but without which the entire operation would fall apart. And she was brilliant. She was my first producer, Claire. I've worked with some great ones who are still there. Mark, Simon, Claire. I call Claire the Director General, actually. She's now producing Sports Report. I called her I said, you'll be Director General one day. It takes people, you need to be very calm. You need a good broad outlook. Obviously, you need to know your sport, not panic, because, there's a lot that is going on there. It's called an outside source. So if you've got, the outside sources are, the Emirates, Old Trafford, Lords, Wimbledon, that's called an outside source. So you probably got about, depends what the day is, 15 or 20 of those, something like that. So that takes a lot of juggling.
And what's kind of the skill set required as a presenter in contrast to reporting and commentating? And as a presenter of Sports Report, which is such a varied programme, what does your week look like in the build-up to a programme like that?
You just need to be across everything. So, I mean, everybody is different. Some people, I think, because I've always been interested in sport from the word go, it was just sort of like, what do geologists call it? It's like sedimentary rock. It's layer upon layer upon layer, just builds up. So it wasn't a question, unless it was Formula One, I had to sit down and learn it.
The engines.
I admit, I had to anything with an engine, I had to sit down and learn it. But other than that, I was pretty much across it. I would look it up, and I'd just read all week and watch all week. I mean, it's a great job because I'd be at home with my feet up on my desk watching the test match, and my wife would walk into my study and go, "What are you doing?" And I go, I'm researching. I'm prepping. I'm prepping for the weekend. She'd go, "Well, you're watching the test match." Exactly. I'm just seeing if the pitch is taking spin or, how the left-handers are batting. For me, I mean, as I say, that's how I do it, and I wouldn't speak for anyone else. Just be across it all, read it also. I mean, I always read even as a kid, I would always read the paper at home. I know reading the newspaper is not something that your generation, my kids your age, would do, but I still do. And it just lodges, it's by osmosis, it goes in. So I'd just make sure I was across everything. I knew everything. If I had to ring somebody to say, "What's this?" And sometimes I would say, "Listen, just talk me through this person." I still do that now, actually. I text mates. And this is the thing. Our business is not so big. Even, most people in it, even if you're not necessarily working for the same organisation now. But chances are you did once upon a time. I text pals about the Six Nations all the time. People who don't work with ITV with me, I just text them and go, "Well, what about him? He's a good player." And so, they'll always come. But everyone's like that. And they'll text me and go, "Who's this? Who's this person? Never heard of him." Or, "What's that?" That's a good fun part of it, actually.
And then speaking of the Six Nations, which you're covering at the moment, you made the transition to TV after 16 years of Sports Report. Presumably you were doing a bit of TV, but you were doing some BT Sports stuff.
I was.
ITV stuff.
I was doing. I hadn't really done anything for BBC, but I'd done bits and bobs for ITV and for international TV. And I don't know. BBC, quite understandably, might well have been said anyway. "Listen, you've had a good run. It's time to change up Sports Report." But the simple truth is, I think this is really important in any walk of life. I probably needed a new challenge, and I needed to prove to myself that I could do television. Now, other people will judge whether they think I've succeeded or not. They can make their own decision. But I needed to challenge myself to go, right, now let's, I think I can say without sounding too arrogant, I think I proved I could do radio. Right now you need to go and see if you can do television. So that was it. And if I hadn't again, it would have been a bit like that thing when I was 30. I thought, if I never tried that, that would have irritated me if I hadn't been given the opportunity. So I'm very grateful to have been given the opportunity to go and see if I can do something which is similar yet different.
Yeah, so in terms of the skill set change there, what skills did you need to kind of learn anew in a sense? Because, I mean, personally for me, a lot of very witty friends of mine always say, I have a face for radio, and I'm not sure everyone ever told you that, but what's the transition like in terms of a skill set?
Well, you have to get used to the fact there's a camera pointing at you. That is different, and sometimes you're looking at the camera and you're reading some words, and that takes a bit of time because it's slightly unnatural to read something. So that takes a little bit of time to do that. I always say, I think it's easier to go from radio to TV than TV to radio. And the reason I say that is when you're on radio, particularly when you're doing Sports Report, I've stood on the touchline for X amount of years. Quite towards the end, as technology got better, with literally a pencil behind my ear and a phone in my hand, which had all my scripts on it. I mean, the ability to improvise and to keep going and to talk. If suddenly they said to me, "Oh, you're going to have to keep going for another minute and a half," that's what you learn. And so to go from television, which is particularly commercial television, which is very time structured because of the adverts, meant I might have to talk for 10 minutes to going to talk for 3 or 4 minutes. Well, that's a lot easier than people who only learn to speak for 3 or 4 minutes suddenly have to speak for 10 minutes. i.e. those people who start on television and then have to do some radio. That's just my view of it. Much easier to do the radio to TV. And for I think probably the same for BBC television. You have got less time than you have on radio by and large. You've got less time, so every word counts, every question counts. You haven't got time to faff about. You've got to get on with it. So I've got to be very disciplined. I've got to know what I've got to say. I've got to say, crisply and concisely, while at the same time being relaxed and having a conversation and listening to the answers and drawing people in, and if necessary, because too many people still don't listen to answers, so they're so busy thinking of their next question and not listening to the bombshell that someone's just dropped. So I think those are the big differences, and the whole television structure, studio setup, you have to get used to, and it's a bit artificial. And you cannot fast forward that bit. So all I would say to anybody is don't judge somebody. Don't turn on the television and say, I've never seen blogs on before. And at the end they go half an hour, well, they're crap, aren't they? Because the chances are they probably are. Because it's an air miles business. You've got to sit in the pilot's seat. And you've got to sit in it again and again and again. And it particularly in television, where you're very, you're in the corner of people's sitting rooms. That's a really private and intrusive place to be. It's one thing being on the radio in the corner, and you might not be very fluent and a bit bumbling, and you're only half listening because you're stacking the dishwasher anyway or feeding the dogs. But your television, people are really concentrating on you. So I'd always say to the viewer, cut people some slack. No one is brilliant first time. I promise you, not even the best people you've ever thought of were great to start with.
And that's the same with punditry, presumably, because I know you've got your own sort of media training company, is that right?
Yeah, I do a bit of that, yeah.
So you must be quite a source of advice for pundits who are working with you as well. Do they ask you for feedback?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the important thing is to be themselves. The really important thing is to be themselves. The really important thing is to tell me, so therefore telling you, the viewer, an experience you had when you were playing. It's really important for you to say, when I was in the dressing room, and we had this situation, this is what we did. When I was in the dressing room, we played this big match, this is what we did. You've got to take me, because I've never been in the dressing room. I've been on the outside of thousands of dressing rooms, but I've never been in the dressing room. So tell me that. Be authentic. I think, to be honest with you, whether you're presenting or reporting or you're a pundit, authenticity is absolutely key. Don't try and be somebody else. You can't keep up the act. It's exhausting to try and keep up. It must be exhausting. But you're going to get seen through. So you've got to be authentic. You've got to be true to yourself. If you're a pundit, take me there. You've been there. I haven't been there. We don't know what it's like. Tell me what it's like in there.
So take us there when you're presenting the show and you're working with different pundits. Say it's a Six Nations game and you're working with Wilkinson, Woodward and Dallaglio. What are your conversations during the week going in? How do you prepare for a programme that, as you say, is quite sort of capped by adverts? And then I'm interested to know after this, half-time, because you have to turn around analysis really quickly. So take us behind the scenes on a match day for TV.
Yeah, well, before the match, it's actually very similar whether it's rugby or football. And I'd say to Jonny Wilkinson or Gary Neville, I'll say the same thing, or Roy Keane, I'll say the same thing, which is... if you watch Gloucester v Harlequins on BT Sport, we do a brilliant job. I don't know what the figures are. 800,000. Let's call it 1 million. If you watch Man United, Man City on Sky, we'll call it 4 million. Okay, just for argument's sake. When we had England Scotland the other day in the Six Nations, I think we had 9-10 million, something like that. When we had England France in the World Cup, we had 23 million. Well, by definition, you can see there are an awful lot of people watching who don't watch club rugby or club football. So I was giving an example. My wife, for example, my sisters, there we are, 3 of them. 2 friends of mine, Ben and Mark, who texted me before the Euro semi-final to say, really excited about the match, where we booked a pub table, can't wait to see you later. And I just texted them back, but you hate football. But no, this is England, this is different. So to answer your question, I always say to the guys, this is not the time to be very technical. You are talking to a very, very broad audience here. So I've got no problem with you talking about emotions and feel and confidence and atmosphere and, the 1 or 2 things which might make a difference. But we're not talking about, inverted fullbacks or, missed scissor moves in rugby or something. Don't get technical. By and large, it's you have to draw. You have to you have to tread a fine line because you don't want to patronise people, and you don't want to patronise people who do know everything that's going on. But you have to be conscious of the fact that you've got a very broad audience. Half-time, then, you are just reacting to what's going on. So, we've sorted out in the previous 45 minutes. This is what's happened. This is what we're looking at. So you talk about that. You talk about that. Come in off the back of each other if you want. But again, tell us what's going on. Sorry, don't tell us what's going on because we can see it. Explain why what has happened has happened. You need to take us to the next stage. We can see he's scored a goal or he's dropped the pass or whatever, but you just need to tell us why.
And working with a variety of different pundits across those different sports, you must learn to personalise your questions. So if Roy Keane's on, you might ask him about leadership. And I remember a nice joke you did when Vieira and Keane were wearing, I think Roy Keane was wearing an armband on his arm or something during the Euros. So what's that process of kind of learning which questions to ask which pundits?
Well, that's also by talking to them before and during the game and just picking things up and listening to what they say and listening to what they're saying each other. I always say to all of them, whatever sport, I always say when we're watching the game itself, I go, tell me what's going on here. Tell me what, talk to me about what's going on here and why. And then I know that will be something useful because if they tell me something I don't quite understand or know, then I can, going back to what we said earlier, I can be the conduit. I can transmit that to the viewer because I've learned something. Therefore, I think they'll learn something. We've also got to remember it's entertainment as well, particularly ITV. ITV is different to the BBC. ITV is an entertainment channel, so you've got to make sure that there is a level there. That it's not Sky, it's not BT, it's not. It shouldn't be just hardcore sports chat. It goes back to the sort of broader church thing. So, there's room and you need to find the level of entertainment, when it's appropriate, when it's natural. Don't force it. Again, if you force it, people can see it coming a mile off. It's not authentic. But when it feels right, and that's just, no one can teach you that. That's just experience. I just have to feel that. I have to sense that. Okay, this is the right moment for it, or this is appropriate, or they'll come out with it, of course. But that's going back to just hour sat in the chair that tells you that.
And some of the names we've been dropping that you call colleagues, I mean, they are unbelievable names, right, for any sports fan. Give me some of the pundits that you've worked with or you've seen you're going to be working with and just gone, oh my word, like I've done this for a while, but this is pretty amazing that I'm going to be standing next to him for this match.
Well, the first time I worked with Roy Keane was, fun enough, I was there last week at Parc des Princes and I was walking up the steps and thinking, this is the first time I worked with Roy. You're thinking, you want to make sure that you're on top of your game. I mean, you ask some proper questions, and you want to be well prepared, and you don't want to show you know what you're talking about. Hopefully, that bit's self-evident. Otherwise, you wouldn't be in the position in the first place. But yeah, it keeps you on your toe. It keeps you sharp as it should be. Keeps you professional. That's all you can. That's all that you can really be. Who else have I worked with that I really? I interviewed him quite a lot. I didn't work with him personally. I interviewed Shane Warne a lot for a bit, which was incredible because I'm cricket mad and he's one of the greatest cricketers of all time. Wisden showed that, didn't he? And it was such a tragedy that he passed so young. But somebody like that, has had such an impact on the game, literally on the game, not just on a particular series or country, but if you love cricket, whoever you are in the world, everyone knows who he is.
Yeah, brilliant. And talking of Roy Keane especially, like there was some good videos from Qatar of a football match you played. I think Keane bagged a winner and then celebrated in a way that he would have absolutely hated if anyone else had done that. I mean, if you're going away for a tournament, you must have some nice stories behind the scenes of spending free time with some of these awesome guys.
Yeah, I mean, it's the thing about going on trips is because you're living with each other, so much. It's really important. I mean, everybody says this. It's really important. With the football match was great because it was really good fun. And actually, I remember him coming because I was playing. I remember him we'd played for about 15 minutes. Then someone said, "Who's that coming over there?" I thought, "Was that Roy coming to play with us?" Because understandably, a lot of footballers don't play football now. A, because they're hurt. And B, I mean, why would you want to play football with mugs like us? Some people just love the game. Roy and Chris Waddle's the other one. Absolutely loved playing. And it was great playing with him. I mean, it was a thrill for me. It was absolutely fantastic to play with him. But it's also important on these trips. You just have a bit of, when you get a bit of downtime to yourself, just have a little bit of time to yourself. But the guys, I mean, they're very good fun. I remember the funniest night probably we ever had in many ways was we were in Kosovo, and Ian Wright was doing I'm a Celebrity. So obviously it wasn't in Kosovo. It was the first night of I'm a Celeb. And our brilliant technical people, it was Roger, who so sadly passed away in Qatar, lovely man. We got back to the hotel. We went, Rog, I'm a Celeb's on in 10 minutes. He went, don't worry, I've sorted it. So we went upstairs to some room, and there were like 60 of us packed into this room watching Righty. It was the one where he walks out on the plank, the first one. And Roy's standing behind me. I'm thinking, Roy's going to hate this. And for about 10 minutes, he's cussing, and then he's really into it. I mean, it's great. And, the way it's a very good team collective, actually, I have to say, at ITV. It really is. All the way down. And to see... to see something like that was great fun. It really was great fun.
I think TV's brought lots of different sides out of Roy Keane that a lot of people didn't know were there. Let's talk specifically about the World Cup in Qatar. Completely different in some ways tournament to anyone's covered.
Yeah.
In terms of going into that tournament, firstly, did you have any personal reservations about going? And secondly, what were your kind of discussions as an ITV team going into that World Cup about your duties as a broadcaster?
I think everyone had reservations. I mean, you wouldn't have been a human being if you didn't have reservations. But this is my contracted job to cover football for ITV at the World Cup. But we all had reservations. But we had many conversations about it, which was, editorially we need to be rigorous and we need to tell the story as it is, and we need to give the context as it is, as the BBC did as well on the first match as well, which I thought they were absolutely right with everything they did. And I know some people criticised them for going over the top, but I thought it was completely fair enough what they did on the opening game, because you needed to put it in the context of what the reality was of the society in Qatar and what it meant having the World Cup there. And we then said after that, right, we then like to be honest with you, whether it be in a football World Cup or in a party convention, we'll then deal with it editorially when it's appropriate, if something happens, which of course it did with the whole armband situation. So in other words, we weren't going to talk about it just for the sake of it, but we would definitely talk about it when it was editorially appropriate, which is what we did. And I was very happy with that approach. I think we got that absolutely right, because I was aware that if we talked about it every night and nothing more had happened, then after about 4 or 5 nights, people might have gone, okay, we know what the issues are because you've been very open about them, but there's nothing more to say, and I don't want to be lectured every night. I was very aware of that. At the same time, it was really important to say what they were, which is what we did. And then I thought there would be something else to talk about, which would mean it was editorially right to do so, which is what happened with the armband. So, and then of course, to sum it all up on the last day in the final as well, to see, where we were and what the impact had been on Qatar, if anything. Which it hasn't been, has it?
No.
And it was never going to be.
Yeah.
Really. The minute we left the World Cup, they go back to the way they always are and they always want to be.
And then, obviously, as a presenter, your role's never to give an opinion, but pundits, it's very different. And Gary Neville, of course, gave his opinions in the final and spoke about the UK government in comparison to the Qatari government. And obviously, there'll be lots of people who'll say, Gary, that's out of order. They'll disagree with Gary. Some will agree with Gary. As a presenter and as someone who's fronting that coverage, what's your kind of reaction to when Gary Neville gives sort of his two bits
I didn't know he was going to say it, to be honest. I just thought, I had to make a very quick decision in my mind that there wasn't any point getting into some debate about it, because that would have just prolonged the conversation, which is when we were at the World Cup final. He'd said his bit, that's what he believes in. Everyone knows what Gary is like, and has these views and outspoken, and that's absolutely fine. But I didn't want to prolong the conversation because we're at the World Cup final, and I thought if we prolonged it, that would have taken up more time that I wanted to spend, thereafter talking about the World Cup final. So it was one of those. So it's Gary's right to talk about it, but I had to make a quick decision. Do I come back at him, or do we just move on? He made his point. We move on.
Give me another example quickly of a quick decision you've had to make. Because there have obviously been loads as a presenter on live radio or TV. What's the time where you've had to make a decision where you've been like, I have no idea what to do here, but the mic's rolling and I've got to go?
Well, I mean, it probably happens quite a lot, to be honest. But you've just got to you've just got to make a decision. You just can't no. You've just got to make a quick decision. Even if you say, well, even if you say, and I'm sure I have, we'll leave that there, or that's for another day, or something. Do you know what I mean? Even if you say that's for another day. We'll do with that on another time. But you've just got to. Yeah, I mean, I can't. The answer is I can't think of anything off the top of my head. But you've just got to say, right, well, that's for another day, which is effectively what I said that night. Back to the action sort of thing.
Yeah, brilliant. It's about being decisive. I've
yes,
got some
it's about being decisive. Yeah,
and confident. Couple of quick fires to finish on. So you're on a desert island, Mark, and joining you is you can't get off, but you've got two companions. They're two pundits that you've worked with. Out of the pundits you've worked with, who are those two guys you're taking on that desert island trip where you're stuck?
Oof.
Could have done with some more warning here, but got to make a decision and be
well,
quick.
if I'm allowed Shane Warne,
yeah,
'cause I love cricket, and I really enjoyed interviewing him, and it's just such an interesting man. God, he would have been a good captain.
Yeah,
Shane Warne and Ian Wright.
Shane Warne and Ian Wright.
That'll be good,
My
yeah.
word, Premier League winners this season.
Oh!
Try and be as.
I still think Man
balanced.
City.
Okay, one sporting moment. You've either scoring 100 at Lords, you're scoring a try at Twickenham, or a goal at Wembley. If it was you doing that, who would you want on commentary?
Who would I want on commentary?
If you were
Do they
the
have
player.
to be a professional commentator?
That could be anyone.
I'd like my dad and me scoring 100 at Lords.
There you go.
Yeah.
If it was a professional commentator,
Richie Benno.
Richie Benno. There you go. Shane Warne's favourite commentator. Yeah. One event that you've covered that you just love to relive?
Oh, when I can't sleep at night, I think about the top 10 things I've been to. One event I've covered that I'd like to relive. Oh, blimey.
Putting him on the spot here because he's good at reacting to us.
There's so many. Do you know what? Fun enough. I mean, I loved Euro. I loved the Euro semi-final, England-Denmark. That was really amazing because the sun was out. I know I'm going to give you a long answer because the sun was out, and we were standing outside, and the whole country had come through COVID and all that awfulness, and it was so exciting that England had won and reached a final again, and it was a beautiful evening, and they were all singing Sweet Caroline. That was really amazing. I love Tony McCoy winning the Grand National.
That was on Sports Report, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was on Sports Report. Yeah. But I probably, do you know what? I think I might go for the last day at the Oval in 2005. And Peterson making 158. It was such an extraordinary innings.
What a player.
And there were people, because there's... I'm closing my eyes to picture where they were in the OCS stand to the left. Those blocks of flats are like people hanging out the windows. It was such an amazing summer. And to win, it was a slightly weird ending because of bad weather. But the Australians were really sporting about it. Warne was amazing. Really sporting about it, the Australians. It was so good for cricket. Everyone was so into it. And it was such an incredible innings. And, the greatest players rise at the greatest moments. And he really did, Peterson. I mean, he absolutely did.
Yeah,
so
he was good for that, wasn't he?
I could think of another 20, but,
course.
Super Saturday, London 2012 was amazing.
Yes.
The opening ceremony was amazing. But I'd just about go for Peterson.
Okay, you're going to have to make this as quick fire as you can because it's quite a hard question. How do you fit Bairstow and Brooke in the same batting lineup for the summer?
It's a very good question, that, Will. And being... I am still just a wicket-keeper in my old age. I really don't want folks to be the victim. That's what I really, really don't want folks to be the victim.
Principles.
My son said to me the other day, just drop folks and let Pope keep it. I went, no, need a proper wicket-keeper. I really, really don't want folks to be the victim. The answer is you might not be able to. The answer is you might not be able to, and that's just incredible. But I think there's so much cricket now. I know it's easy to say this as fast bowlers. There's a bit more of that sort of squad business, isn't it? So you might have to have one or the other, but don't drop the wicketkeeper. Is that clear?
Yeah, absolutely. One lesson or piece of advice that you'd give, I think you've already mentioned it, but one piece of advice you'd give for someone starting out on this journey.
Okay. Watch, listen, and read as much as you can. Decide in your own mind what works and what doesn't. I still do this today, and I'm 55. I did this morning, listening to the radio, and I went, that's crap. I went, that's a really bad report. You know, you're never too old to learn, but listen to people and watch and go, that's good, I like that, that's not so good, and decide in your own mind why. It's an art, not a science. So it's not necessarily a right or wrong answer. Unless you ask me, I'll tell you there is. But you know what I mean? There's not necessarily a right or wrong answer. Be prepared. It's a very capricious business. It's not always a meritocratic business. It's a tough business. You need to be able to, you know, sometimes you're facing the fastest West Indian fast bowling and you're getting peppered. You've got to hang in there. You've got to hang in there. It won't always go your own. I don't know anybody in this business where it's always gone their own way. You've got to be able to take the knockbacks. But it's great fun. You work with some incredibly good people, talented, creative, ambitious. Hang in there. Oh, and sorry, people always say to me, "What's the most important attribute?" You need to have stamina, and I'm being deadly serious. You need to have stamina. 90%. I said this to Roy Keane the other day. I went, Roy, the truth is 90% of life is turning up. And he went, yeah, it probably is actually. You've got to turn up day after day after day. And if you are in front of the camera or behind the mic, no one's interested. You've had a row with your wife, or your dog's been sick in your shoe, or if you've got to put the bins out, you're acting to a certain degree. You've got to smile. And don't forget, you know, your mood will affect the people around you as well. Particularly if you're the presenter, your mood will affect people. You've got to, you know, you are also very responsible for the mood in that studio. Whether TV or radio doesn't matter. So, you know, go in there with a smile on your face. Be grateful. Enjoy it, and don't moan about having to go. I work with some people who would moan if they've got to go to a European Cup tie in Milan. I mean, people give their bloody eye teeth to go to European Cup tie in Milan. You know, be grateful, work hard, listen. Don't take. I'm not too long an answer to this. Sorry. And if you're going to take advice, just take it from a few people. I think the problem with actually, full stop, no matter what the profession is, for your generation, say my kids are your age, sometimes there's so much advice, it's all slightly a mix and contradictory.
So who are your go-to couple of people then?
I've got two people I go to. Oh, yeah. I text them. Absolutely, I do. Text them still now. Say, tell me if, you know, I've got two people. Fun enough, they work together, actually. And I go, just tell me. I'll take it from you. 2 or 3 people. I won't take it from a 15-year-old on Twitter for a million things.
Plenty of them.
Plenty of them. But I'll take it from them. But I think the most important person of all is yourself. And no one knows more than you do as well. Do you know what I mean? Don't
the man staring back in the glass.
Yourself. Yeah.
One final question. You said be grateful. That's one of your tips. Who are you most grateful to for your journey?
Honestly, my wife. I know that sounds a bit like, oh, you would say that. But my wife, because, you know, she's given up a lot. It's not right the word. Because it's not straightforward being married to somebody who is... she'll tell you, I've got 3 kids, boy, girl. Both, when the girls were born, I went away within 3 weeks for a month on both occasions to a major football championship. It's not that straightforward. When your husband just disappears for a month and goes, got to go watch football for a month, it's work. You know, she's been incredible, and she gave up her career for a long, long time for that. And no, for her, to her, definitely. For doing, or you talked about Claude Makélélé earlier, she's better than Claude Makélélé, but you know what I mean. For giving up all that and for always being the one there when I'm disappearing off and everything. Yeah, I couldn't do it without her. Honestly, genuinely could not do it without her. Simple as that.
Mark Pougatch and Mark's wife, thank you so much for joining us on I Know That Voice. That's been episode 2, and you can find this episode wherever you get your podcasts, on YouTube as well, and on social media. It's been a pleasure to speak to Mark, and we'll be back for another episode very shortly. Thanks very much.